Hi, it's Matthew and Sydney's small group. We meet in West Vancouver, and welcome to Chris's Corner.
Welcome everyone to Small Group. This is Alita and I'm Chris, and
Hi.
it's great to be with you. Last week, I found it interesting at the start of the small group video, there was a big deal made of Jason's t-shirt. It was a Terry Fox t-shirt. What's interesting is one of the small group leaders texted me that night while I'm
Okay.
in my own small group
Okay.
and said, reminded me that their small group made me a t-shirt with a picture of their small group on it. And he was wondering when I'm going to wear that. And I
Is
just
it-
want to say, sorry,
No, go ahead. You finish.
it's like a picture like this
Yes.
on a t-shirt that was then given to me as a gift,
Okay.
from a small group in North Van.
Okay.
And the question was, when will I wear it? And first, I want to say I will wear it. And thank you very much. It was a very generous gift. Second, I want to say it's winter. And you gave me a t-shirt. And you don't realize this, but it's freezing in this room where we're filming. So I
It
need
is
the
so
weather
cold.
to warm up a little
Yes.
bit.
I feel like I could probably speak for a lot of us when I say we were expecting you to just you had it on under your sweater.
Yeah, no, I
But-
thought about doing that. I could also wear the t-shirt over a sweater.
But if anybody's remembering, and I don't mean to point this out, but I kind of do, I guess. This is now your Chris's Corner season 2024 sweater.
This is
third time.
yes.
We're loving it. We still love
This
the sweater.
This is the first time I've done it intentionally.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
did.
There was thought put into it.
A bit of thought.
We love it.
Anywho, let's get into. We're in
Great.
a series on the gospel
Yes.
according to Mark, and we're in week, what is it, 5 now?
6, I think, actually.
Week 6. And so this is the story of Jesus inviting a man named Levi, or Matthew is his Greek name, to follow him. So why don't you read it,
Sure.
and then I'll give us like a summary of the talk we gave on Sunday.
Sure. Okay, so this is Mark chapter 2, verses 13 to 17. It says, "Once again, Jesus went outside beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. 'Follow me,' Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, 'Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?' On hearing this, Jesus said to them, 'It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners.'"
So part of the purpose of these shorter videos is to give a bit of a recap of the message, and it acts as a catalyst for conversation in the group. And so we talked about a few things
Yeah.
on Sunday, but let me just give a structure. We put it in different words, but basically these are the things we talked about. The call of Levi, the response of the religious leaders, or Jesus's meal with sinners, and the illustration he gives at the end, which you just read
Right.
so well. And so I think we should do a bit of a recap.
Sure.
And so why don't you just give us some thoughts about the call of Levi
Right,
and what that
yeah.
tells us about Jesus?
Yeah, so we've already seen in Mark chapter 1, if you were with us in the first chapter a few weeks ago, we saw that Jesus has already been doing this. He's already been calling people to him. And in Mark chapter 1, we saw him call his first 4 followers. They were the 4 fishermen, if you'll remember that, if you were here for that. And now the text that we studied this week tells us that Jesus is once again outside beside the lake. It's a kind of a similar scene, but this time he calls out to Levi to follow him. And of course, this is significant because in this day, rabbis were not the ones going out there pursuing students. Students usually pursued rabbis. So this is significant in all kinds of ways. But there's an extra layer of significance here because Levi is a tax collector. And so again, Jesus is doing the unexpected thing, calling unexpected people to him, which is, of course, just like Jesus. And something that I think helps us to understand the story a little better is knowing the role of tax collectors in first century Israel. And so for Levi, what he would have been doing is he would have been collecting taxes on behalf of Rome. And they would at this time, they would collect general taxes on things that we would be familiar with, things like property taxes, income taxes. But then they would also collect taxes on imports and exports, those sorts of things. But the tax collectors of Jesus's day would often overinflate the prices so that then they're making a profit. They're essentially skimming not even a little off the top, kind of like a lot off of the top. And they were charging charging their own people then in order to get rich. So then the Jewish people saw tax collectors as traitors and cheats, because here they were, their fellow Jews that were helping an occupying foreign enemy to tax them. And the Gospel Coalition, I like how they say it. They say that in the Gospels, tax collectors were considered social bottom feeders, which I think is just an interesting way for us to sort of understand this and wrap our minds around it. So then what's amazing then is that Jesus comes to Levi, pursues him, and says, "Follow me." And I was just thinking about this week, about sort of comparing the stories between him calling the 4 fishermen and now he's calling Levi. And I just think it's maybe even more astounding that he's calling a tax collector, because maybe we could wrap our minds around him calling 4 fishermen, because they were, even though they may not have been the brightest boys in school, at least they were decent. They were hardworking men. They had taken on the family trade. They hadn't forsaken family for the sake of money. They hadn't forsaken their country. So maybe we could wrap our minds around them being invited to follow Jesus. But a tax collector, that was like another layer. That was like another level. It was like calling the very worst of the worst, a guy who's willingly cheating his neighbors and his family. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Follow me." And I think it's just interesting having all of this, again, this context for us to understand what's happening here, that Jesus calls Levi, who knew he was a sinner. And what does Levi do? He gets up immediately, follows him. And then we have this kind of a scene change, which is, it all ties in together. But Levi knows he's a sinner and then invites Jesus to his house, and they have a meal together, which I think is another cool part of the story.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? Levi, his Greek name is Matthew. He's one of the disciples. Church tradition says the Gospel of Matthew, he wrote it.
Yes.
And tax collectors had a well-developed shorthand. They even had wooden tablets covered with wax that they would write receipts on. So you can imagine Matthew, Levi taking notes as Jesus is teaching, which then become the Gospel of Matthew. So something really beautiful comes out of Levi's life, even though he started off in a very corrupt, crooked place. And so they have this meal, and there's Jesus's favorite title for himself, the Son of Man. We talked about that briefly last week. And there's 3 phrases you see in the Gospels where Jesus uses it as a self-designation. He says, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. The Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many, or to rescue many. And then there's this other phrase, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. And the first 2 times the Son of Man phrase is used, it describes his mission: seek and save the lost, give his life away to rescue many. And the third statement, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, really describes his method of accomplishing his mission. That in the Gospels, Jesus is often going to a meal, at a meal, or leaving a meal. It's like a primary place of encounter, and meals were used to define boundaries: who was in, who was out. Eating together was a symbol of friendship. And the Pharisees are troubled, and their response is negative once again because of who Jesus is eating with. He's eating with, the bottom rung, the sinners, the outcasts. And what's interesting is Jesus and the Pharisees both care about holiness. They both care about obeying God's commands. They both believe that if you bring your life under God's rule or leadership, it'll radically change you. They both believe that. So why is there a conflict? And I think one of the reasons is because the Pharisees believe that transformation precedes invitation, meaning you've got to clean up your life before you get to be included in what God's up to in the world. And that's how religion often operates. You obey so that you are accepted. You change so that you are loved. And you changing and you being good enough becomes the precondition for your love and acceptance and invitation. And you see that in the Pharisees' mindset, whereas Jesus in the kingdom comes and says, no, invitation precedes transformation. Jesus does believe that if you receive his invitation, if you follow him, it will radically change your viewpoints and your life and how you live. And Jesus cares about that. But he starts with the invitation, which is pretty radical and compelling in how we view God's grace.
It has tons of implications even for us, how we engage with other people as well. So interesting.
And then the last thing is simply just the illustration he gives. I've come to call. It's his explanation
Right.
or his defense of what he's doing. I've come to call the sick, not the righteous. Any thoughts about that as we get ready to
Yeah,
end here?
I think that it's so interesting that Jesus' mission, like you said, it was to save the lost. And part of his method was eating and drinking with people. And I think it was John Mark Comer who said that Jesus saved people one meal at a time. And I mean, whatever we think about that, the point is that Jesus intentionally gathered around
That's a good quote.
tables. There you go. Keep it. But he intentionally gathered around tables with what many would deem the wrong kind of people. And I think that if we kind of zoom out, Jesus is showing us, I think, a big picture of what the kingdom of God is like. I mean, this is what he does. He invites us in, as you said. The invitation precedes the transformation, and he accepts us as we are, where we are, and in doing so offers us hope and reconciliation. And for myself, even as you were talking, I'm just sitting here thinking, I wonder, like, is that what my table, both figuratively and literally, does? Does it offer hope? Does it offer reconciliation? And I hope it does. So, yeah.
Sorry, I just noticed someone opened the door there.
Oh.
It's distracted me
Well,
just a
welcome.
little.
You're welcome here. We were just talking about that, actually.
Yeah. You are. They're gone. They left.
Well,
Yeah, I think we'll talk about hospitality in our homes and how our tables can become a place of like encounter with the living God. And I also just think this picture Jesus paints changes the type of culture we have as a church. Like,
yeah.
and here's the illustration I'll end with. It's like the difference between a waiting room where people are waiting to be interviewed for a job, and the difference contrasting that with like the waiting room at a hospital. And so it's like a job interview, people are dressed for success. There's pressure to perform, to measure up, to put your best foot forward, to edit your resume, to somehow make your weaknesses sound like strengths. The other people in the waiting room, they're competitors, right? Like not patients, people to beat, not people with needs to meet. And that environment is actually an enemy to authenticity and vulnerability and humility. And since all those things are required for deep relationship, it's an enemy to that as well. And so, but a room filled with patience is different, right? Everyone's sick, albeit in different ways. Everyone needs help. Everyone needs comfort. No reason to pretend you're not sick. You're a patient with other patients in a waiting room, waiting for a physician, right? There's no room for pride or showboating or one-upmanship, right? There's authenticity, there's shared need. No one gets to pretend they don't need help. And it leads to openness and vulnerability and humility and a radical encounter with the grace of God around the table. And the gospel creates that second type of environment. And we're all in dire straits. We're all on the mat like last week. And God has come to rescue us and invite us in Christ. And so if you're new to faith in church, Christianity is not like a ladder of moral and religious achievement that we climb to be close to God and his love. It's more like a table where God comes to dine with us in love. And
so
it's
beautiful.
that invitation to that table that leads to transformation over time in our lives. And it has implications for our table as well, which is, again, hospitality, something we'll talk about. And so we're going to throw to you, small groups, and hope you have a great discussion.
Yep. See you next time. Two years ago, I'm laying in bed and I went, oh, and Ryan was like, what? And I go, big bird, because it's a big bird.